Hello, my friend, it's me again, BAWLER. I have some interesting news for you as always. Please subscribe to my channel and write what you think about it in the comments. Canada has just delivered a major financial blow to Russia while offering substantial support to Ukraine. And it did so in a way that targets President Putin and his inner circle right where it hurts most, their wallets. The country transferred a massive $1.7 billion to Ukraine. But the remarkable part? None of that money was Canadian. It all came directly from frozen Russian assets. In essence, Canada used Russia's own wealth to empower Ukraine. So how did this come to be? Soon after the war in Ukraine erupted, many countries around the world imposed sanctions on Russia to cripple its economy and pressure Moscow into halting its aggression. A key element of those sanctions involved freezing Russian assets globally. That meant governments blocked access to money and property held by Russian individuals, businesses, and institutions, including government officials, state enterprises, banks, and wealthy oligarchs. These frozen assets covered a wide range of holdings: foreign currency reserves, bank accounts, luxury real estate, expensive goods, as well as stocks and investments tied to Western companies. Russia could no longer access, transfer, or liquidate any of them. By the end of the war's first year, around $300 billion in Russian assets had been frozen, and that amount has only continued to climb. For months, the world debated how such a vast sum could be put to use. Initially, most nations simply froze these assets as a deterrent, hoping the war would end quickly. But as the conflict dragged on, global leaders began proposing a more direct use, helping Ukraine. That line of thinking led to the creation of the Extraordinary Revenue Acceleration Initiative, or ERA. Launched in June 2024, the ERA loans program, backed by the G7 nations, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the UK, and the US, pledged up to $53 billion in loans to Ukraine. These loans would eventually be repaid using the profits generated from Russia's frozen assets. In practical terms, it's a way of redirecting Russian money to bolster Ukraine's military and economy, a move bound to infuriate Putin and the Russian elite whose wealth is being redirected. Although the ERA plan was announced last year, it took time to finalize the mechanisms for extracting those profits and transferring funds. Now the money is flowing, and Canada is leading the charge. On June 30th, Ukraine's Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal confirmed that the country had received approximately $1.7 billion USD or 2.3 billion Canadian dollars under the ERA program. These funds were secured using revenue from frozen Russian assets. Together with our allies, Shmyhal said, we are making Russia pay for its crimes and destruction. Since the beginning of the year, Ukraine has received a total of $17.6 billion through these frozen funds. Shmyhal expressed gratitude to Canada and all involved, emphasizing the importance of fully confiscating Russia's frozen assets to compensate war victims and rebuild Ukraine. A move that would also serve as a warning against future aggression. And this is just the start. Canada has committed a total of $5 billion Canadian dollars to the ERA initiative. These funds are likely to be spent on defense, providing Ukraine's armed forces and law enforcement with vital resources and potentially funding military R&D. Some may also go to humanitarian efforts, including assistance for the millions of internally displaced Ukrainians who have been forced from their homes. As of late 2023, nearly 4 million Ukrainians had been displaced, a number that's likely grown since. The money will also aid in rebuilding infrastructure destroyed by constant Russian attacks, restoring hospitals, energy plants, and other vital facilities to ensure basic services like electricity, clean water, and medical care are maintained. With Canada's recent transfer, Ukraine has now received nearly $18 billion in ERA funding. The program began in January, when the European Commission disbursed its first $3 billion. That was the first step toward a broader $18.1 billion aid package for 2025. At the time, European Commission Vice President Kaja Kallas noted that Russia had been systematically destroying Ukraine's infrastructure for 1,000 days, and that the new funding would support repairs while freeing up Ukrainian budget space for defense. Those loans, too, will be repaid using profits from frozen Russian assets in the EU. Russia started this war, Kallas said, so Russia must pay for it. Since then, the EU has delivered additional $1 billion payments in March, April, May, and June, 5 payments so far this year. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen reaffirmed the EU's long-term support for Ukraine, stating that this funding, part of the G7's broader $18.1 billion ERA framework, was essential not only for Ukraine's recovery, but for holding Russia financially accountable. The EU, she emphasized, is Ukraine's largest financial backer, and these funds help stabilize Ukraine's economy and rebuild war-torn infrastructure. Other G7 nations are following suit. On June 5th, Japan signed a loan agreement with Ukraine, pledging more than $3 billion to support the Ukrainian economy, defense sector, and infrastructure. Finance Minister Serhiy Marchenko called Japan a key partner, noting that since February 2022, Japan has provided over $8.5 billion in aid, including nearly $1 billion in grants. Please support my channel with a small donation. It's not much for you, but for me, it's an incentive to keep going and bring you important news. I've included a PayPal link to support my channel in the description for this video. Thank you. Marchenko added that implementing the ERA mechanism would help cover Ukraine's 2025 budget and maintain fiscal stability. The US also joined the program late last year, delivering the first $1 billion of a pledged $20 billion. Again, Marchenko thanked Washington for its fast, flexible support, noting that for the first time, Ukraine was receiving funds generated from frozen Russian assets. In March, the UK announced its first ERA loan transfer, $752 million, or roughly $1 billion, as part of a larger $2.26 billion commitment. Chancellor Rachel Reeves emphasized that Ukraine's need for dependable allies had never been greater in the wake of Russia's unprovoked invasion. In total, Ukraine has received almost $18 billion in ERA loans in 2025, all funded by Russian assets. That money is crucial, helping to stabilize Ukraine's economy and defend against daily Russian attacks. And the ERA funds are especially meaningful, knowing they come directly from those who have funded Russia's war machine. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha recently proposed taking things further. At the Fair Play conference in June, he suggested not just using profits from frozen assets, but seizing the assets themselves. Those funds, he argued, should be used to buy weapons, invest in Ukraine's defense industry, and rebuild the nation. Sybiha called for bold, decisive action to halt Russian aggression, saying NATO's awareness of the Russian threat is steadily increasing. Whether the ERA initiative will expand remains to be seen. But for now, the redirected funds are a lifeline. At the recent NATO summit in The Hague, Secretary General Mark Rutte announced that Europe and Canada are on track to send Ukraine more support in 2025 than in any previous year. Over $35 billion had already been pledged by July, compared to just over $50 billion in all of 2024. This support is essential, especially as Russia's military budget continues to soar. In 2025, defense spending now exceeds 6% of Russia's GDP and makes up more than 30% of the federal budget, the highest level since the Cold War. The Kremlin spent over $140 billion on defense in 2024, and even more is expected this year. Russia is clearly determined to win this war at any cost, pouring money into salaries, weapons, vehicle production, logistics, and more. Its defense budget vastly outweighs Ukraine's, and it fields more tanks, armored vehicles, and fighter jets. Ukraine simply cannot match that scale on its own, which is why aid like the ERA loans is so vital. Each contribution from Ukraine's allies, whether through ERA or direct payments, is a lifeline, and the psychological victory of using Russian oligarch money to resist Russia's invasion adds to Ukraine's resilience. Meanwhile, Russia's economy is unraveling. Reports suggest even Putin is struggling to maintain the illusion of strength. At the St. Petersburg Economic Forum, Economic Development Minister Maxim Reshetnikov openly warned that Russia is nearing recession, a rare admission from someone in his position. Central Bank head Elvira Nabiullina echoed those fears, saying the early war years were sustained by free labor and reserves, but those resources are now depleted. In 2022, Russia's National Wealth Fund held $113 billion. By June 2025, it had shrunk to just $36.4 billion. Its lowest since 2019. The toll of war and sanctions is undeniable. Business profits have plummeted, oil and gas revenues are down by half, industrial growth has stagnated, and GDP growth slowed from 4.1% to 1.4% year over year. Despite low unemployment, Russia faces a 2 million person labor shortage. These pressures are affecting not only average citizens, but the wealthy elites who've backed Putin for years. Watching their fortunes shrink and their assets weaponized against them must be deeply unsettling. Some insiders suggest discontent is growing. An anonymous analyst told Novaya Gazeta Europe that Putin now faces a choice: continue the war and ruin the economy, or pull back and restore financial stability. But with so much invested and little to show, retreat would make Putin appear weak. So he's trapped, boxed in by his own pride, Ukraine's resistance, and global unity. And while he pours billions into the military, Ukraine continues receiving aid from the very people he sought to silence. The war isn't ending soon. Russian losses, already over 1 million casualties, including more than 250,000 deaths, will only mount, and Russia's economy will only worsen. Maybe eventually this financial and military pressure will force Putin to the negotiating table. Until then, the G7 will keep turning Russia's own assets into Ukraine's strength,